Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminally, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, everything I read in September. Before we go any further, just give me 1 minute to talk to you about today's sponsor, Serious Readers. I've been using their high definition reading light for weeks now, and it really has made a difference to my reading in the evenings. I don't know about you, but my ceiling lights just aren't quite bright enough, especially as my eyes get older. And I found that using their reading light really makes it much easier for me to read. They use what they call daylight wavelength technology to replicate daylight, and it really is like reading outside. And the light isn't just great for reading, you can use it for other activities as well. My wife keeps on asking if she can borrow it when she's crocheting or painting in the evening. So now we have to toss a coin to see who gets the chair with the light behind it. Their lights are hand assembled in the UK and recommended by over 500 opticians. They also come with a full 5-year warranty and a 30-day risk-free trial if you're in the UK mainland. If you're interested in checking their lights out, there'll be a link in the description to this video and you can use the code OLLIE24 to get £100 off your first order. So September was the month of Shorty September, the annual reading event that focuses on reading shorter books, created by Pastory Time and Too Many Heathers. So a really fun event that I enjoy taking part in every year. By shorter books, they mean books under about 200 pages or so. So I've definitely got some of those here to talk to you about today. Did read some other things as well. There are loads of very amusing prompts for Shorty September, which I struggle to keep track of, but all of which are based around different types of shorts. So I definitely covered off a number of the prompts in this stack of books, but I can't remember quite which one covered which prompt, so forgive me for that. Anyway, let me go through the books. I think there's 23 things to talk to you about today, so it was a very enjoyable reading month for me. In terms of volume, probably a bit lower than some of the months I've had recently, particularly because I was reading shorter books. I kind of expected I'd read more, but I wasn't very well. Partway through the month I had like a kind of viral cold type thing, and as you can probably hear, I've got a cold again now at the beginning of October, so that's very annoying indeed. Anyway, I will let me stop rambling and start talking about the books. So as usual, I will go through these in the order that I read them, and then at the end I will tell you my book of the month. Okay, so first thing I read then was 6 Bullets to a Man by Jethro Wegener. So this was a really entertaining 70s set kind of thriller basically, where the main character, who's a black guy who's just come back from Vietnam, one of his buddies in Vietnam died out there and left him a letter to take to his mum. So he takes that letter to her. She lives in Mississippi in a small town. There's a corrupt sheriff. There's lots of bad stuff going on, and Duke Gibbs, the hero, basically rights some wrongs, shall we say. So a really entertaining book, definitely my kind of thing, that kind of pulpy action adventure type story, but with some a bit of kind of political savvy to it as well. So I thought it was really good, and I'm looking forward to reading the second book in the series, which I've also got. After that, I read Cruel Nature by D.B. Albiza. So this is a short story collection, like middle grade horror short stories. I really enjoyed this. So D.B. Albiza is a teacher. She wrote this as a book to get her kids, her pupils, interested in reading. It's got some really quite creepy short stories in it. I was surprised by how creepy the stories in this were. Definitely one I recommend if you like that kind of thing, especially if you've got like a younger child who you might want to read some creepy short stories to. It's also got, let's see if I can find one. It's also got really fantastic creepy illustrations. So yeah, I had a really good time with that. Next up then, we have I'm starting to worry about this Black Box of Doom by Jason Pargin. This came out this month. Really entertaining. I really enjoyed this a lot. So a great central concept, which is basically this guy who's a Lyft driver gets offered hundreds of thousands of dollars to drive this mysterious young woman and this even more mysterious black box she's got across the country. He has to leave his cell phone behind. He's not allowed to contact anyone. He's not allowed to ask her any questions about what's in the box. And it's just kind of that adventure of them driving across the country, as outside of the space of the car that they're in, people start realising there's something a bit weird going on and start theorising about what's in the box. So this whole kind of internet subculture springs up around their journey, which they're completely oblivious to because they haven't got their cell phones with them. So just a really fun book, very funny at times, like quite compelling in that you really want to find out what's happening. Ends in a really, really crazy way. I just had a good time with it, and it has some really interesting stuff to say about internet culture as well. So definitely one I recommend, and there is a full review of that one on the channel. After that then, another indie horror short story collection, and I did do a video this month where I talked about a bunch of indie horror short story collections I read recently. So this one was Dread by Kevin Bachar. So this is 22 like scary stories of a real variety to the stories in this book. There's some that are more kind of suspensey, there's some that are like animal attacks and things like that, a real range of different horror stories, but all of them have a real sense of tension. I really thought Kevin Bachar captured tension well in this book. He really like gradually ramps things up, so introduces a weird situation and then gradually ramps up the tension as the book progresses. So another recommendation if you like short horror fiction. After that then, another collection of short horror stories. So this was during the month when I wasn't very well. I was spending a lot of time in bed. I couldn't really concentrate, so I found short stories a really good way to keep reading without taxing my brain too much. So this was Red Moon by Kerry Richardson. So another like entertaining short story collection, 6 stories in this book. And again, quite a variety to them. So there's a couple that are almost kind of slightly crimey, but with a supernatural edge. There's one that's Lovecraftian. Just a nice, like, slim collection of horror stories from another indie author. And I do always like to support indie authors on the channel. Speaking of which, I have another short story collection of horror stories by an indie author. That is Death is Funny Sometimes by MC August. So this is, again, like a nice variety to the stories, but the thing that really struck me about the stories in this volume is MC August has a real knack for dialogue. The dialogue in some of these stories was absolutely fantastic. There's some interesting concepts in there as well. There's a lot of stories that relate to like movies and the movie industry in various ways. I think it's the second story in the volume, is about like an aging giallo actress, which was really fun. So again, nice variety, some entertaining stories, some good concepts. But yeah, that one had really fantastic dialogue. Next up then, another short story collection, but not a modern one. So this dates back to, I think, the 60s, and some of the stories are older than that. So it's Nightmares and Geezenstacks by Fredric Brown. So Fredric Brown, very prolific writer for like magazines and things like that, wrote novels as well, of both science fiction and crime. And this collection has a mixture of different things in it, mostly sci-fi, some horror, some crime, some kind of slightly bawdy stories. All really entertaining, and the thing that's amazing about some of these stories is they're like less than a page long. They're really, really short, and yet in that very short amount of time, Fredric Brown manages to give you a complete story, to give you a story that feels like it's got everything a story needs. So I was really impressed with this. Some of the stories have dated quite badly, especially the bawdier ones, which I kind of suspect were probably written for men's magazines back in the day, but still an entertaining volume. After that then, the second book for my Novel Life challenge. So this is a challenge where I'm reading a book from every year I've been... sorry, I'll start that again. Where I'm reading a novel from every year I've been alive. So the second year I was alive was 1974, and the book I chose from that was Jack Carter's Law by Ted Lewis. So this was the prequel to Jack's Return Home, which was filmed as Get Carter. So... Get Carter, Jack's Return Home, is about this like London gangster who goes back home up north because his brother's died. Jack Carter's Law is like the prequel to that, so it's him being a gangster in London, and I didn't like it nearly as much as Jack's Return Home. I thought Jack's Return Home was excellent. Jack Carter's Law just feels more like a pretty standard British gangster novel. So it definitely had some tension, had a ton of action, and moved at a really fast pace, and it had some great writing in it as well. Ted Lewis did kind of like hard-boiled writing, but in a very British way, which I did appreciate. But overall, definitely a bit of a disappointment after Jack's Return Home. Next up, something very different but very, very enjoyable: Sherlock Holmes Zombies Over London by Stephen Mertz. So this was a slightly weird, but it's one of those books that just left a smile on my face because it was just so much fun. So it's got Sherlock Holmes going up against Moriarty, But in this book, Moriarty's got zombies, and there's airships, and Albert Einstein's in the book, H.G. Wells is in the book. So it's just a ton of different stuff all thrown together with a very fast-paced, very entertaining story. So yeah, it was a laugh. I enjoyed that one. Next up, another indie book. This is Headhunters by Louis Paredes. So the cover makes this look like a kind of YA horror book, and it kind of is, but it kind of isn't. It's more kind of dark fantasy, I would have said. So it's about this young kid whose grandfather has died, but the kid can still see his grandfather's ghost and communicate with it, and a demon and the demon's kind of cohorts invade their house, basically. So it's about a battle between the kid, his grandfather, or his grandfather's ghost, and some local friends against this group of demons. So it was an interesting concept, and a lot of it was really, really well done. It was the family dynamic was beautifully done, or found family dynamic, I guess. But the demon kind of hierarchy and structure, and their kind of family unit, if you like, was very entertainingly done as well. So I enjoyed both those parts of it. Overall, it's not really my kind of book, if I'm honest. I'm not really a fan of that kind of dark fantasy style of book. So I didn't absolutely love it, but there was a lot I admired about it. Next up then, some poems. So I often say on the channel I don't enjoy poems. I did enjoy this volume of poetry, and indeed whenever I actually read poetry I usually quite enjoy it. I just instinctively will turn to novels and short stories ahead of poetry. So anyway, I read Permanent Verb by Gareth Howells, who's the host of the channel Book Songs and Other Magic. So this was a really nice collection of poetry, some quite moving poetry in here. There's clearly some of these poems were deeply personal, and I think Gareth says that in the introduction. So yeah, an enjoyable collection of poetry that reminded me that actually I do quite like poetry and should try and read it a bit more. It occurs to me that this has been quite an unusual month for me, reading-wise, in that I've read an absolute ton of short stories, which I don't normally do. I might normally have one or two short story collections, but certainly not the volume I've read this month. And also, I read some poetry, so a bit of variety to my reading, which is welcome, I guess. I tend to get stuck into ruts of just reading novels, so nice to read some different things as well. Right, moving on then. A novel. In fact, I think most of I've got another short story collection in here. So next thing I read then was A Dark and Subtle Light by Mark Hodder. This was just so much fun. So this comes out in early October, so October the 8th, which I think might be the day this video goes up, or around the day this video goes up. So this was just a really fun mix of kind of a historical adventure and fantasy. So the concept is there's this alien species that's trying to influence events on Earth. They have infected this group of fascists who have set up a commune in kind of 18th century Europe. So they're the baddies. On the side of the goodies, you have Machiavelli and Leonardo da Vinci, both of whom are immortal. So they can kind of die and then come back again when they are needed to fight the alien threat. So this was one of those books with kind of a really fun team dynamic. So Machiavelli, who's the hero, has a group of people around him who help him fight the fascists. Some great action sequences, a nice fast pace to it, but just inventive and enjoyable and fun, but with some basis in historical truth as well. So the commune that the fascists are running is based on a real event. So yeah, a very, very enjoyable kind of pulpy adventure story, just the kind of thing I like. Speaking of pulpy adventure stories, up next I read Mac Bolan Book 20, or Mac Bolan The Executioner, Book 24, Canadian Crisis by Don Pendleton. So this one had Mac Bolan The Executioner in Canada, fighting the mafia again and winning again. You probably don't need to know much more than that. It was entertaining. There was some kind of discussion of Quebec separatists and Canadian politics and things like that, which was kind of interesting. Very dated, clearly, given it was written in the 70s. But yeah, another fun read in the Executioner series. Next up then, a horror novella, Harvest Blood by A.W. James. So this again was just fun, just a fun book. So it has the feel of like an 80s like direct-to-video horror movie. You know, quite simple concepts, very fast-paced, but really enjoyable. So it's set in a small town where every Halloween for the past, I think, 11 years, a kid has gone missing. And nobody knows where these kids have gone. So the local sheriff is determined that this Halloween is going to be the last Halloween that happens. The book goes in all sorts of different directions. It packed a lot in for a small book. But as I say, just fast-paced, entertaining, nice concepts, and just a fun short read. Next up then, the final book in the Ripley series by Patricia Highsmith. So as you'll know, I've been doing a read-through of all of Patricia Highsmith's books. This was her penultimate novel, Ripley Underwater. And it was great. It was a really nice wrap-up to the Ripley series. It kind of replayed events from some of the earlier books, had Ripley reflecting on those events, had a couple of people who turn up in the small town that Ripley lives in and are clearly interested in him in some way, clearly know some stuff about his past. And it's about him trying to figure out what that is. So you get that kind of wonderful ambiguous tension that Patricia Highsmith often has in their book, in her books. You get that in spades in Ripley Underwater. So I really enjoyed it. Next then, a book I read as a buddy read with Heidi, one of my patrons. This was Experimental Film by Gemma Files. This was good. This was really good. So I love films about cursed art, which is what this is. So this is about a movie, a movie from the early days of movies, where clips from this weird old film have been used in an experimental film that a modern filmmaker is making. And the central character in the book is a film lecturer who's seen this experimental film and becomes intrigued by it and is trying to find out the history of the clips that are in it. So really creepy at times. Some nice kind of family dynamic type stuff in it, so that the central character's son is autistic. So there's a lot about their relationship, which was really interesting. But yeah, just very creepy, and the tension just gradually ramps up as the book progresses to a really impressive climax. So I like that one a lot. Next then we have the pick for the Criminally Book Club in September, which was Titanium Noir by Nick Harkaway. So this is kind of a mix of crime and sci-fi, so a mystery novel but set in the future in a city where there is I really don't want to spoil this book, and I think it's probably spoiled on the back of the book, but I love the central concept so much, and it's introduced subtly in the book that I don't want to spoil it. But basically, rich people in this future society can do something that makes them different, and the plot kind of revolves around that. So it revolves around the death of someone who has done this thing. So kind of quite a hard-boiled feel to it, a great central investigator character, some really good fight scenes, a couple of really enjoyable fight scenes, and just a nice mystery teased out over the book, and this great kind of sci-fi concept at the heart of it as well. So I enjoyed that a lot. After that, this one I definitely read for Shorty September. So when I put up my September TBR video, one of the prompts for Shorty September was to read a book with a title that could have been shorter. My dad saw that video and sent me a copy of this book, which I remember being on the shelves when I was a kid. So it's you maybe remember this from weekly wrap-up videos. I need to censor the cover because it's a book from the late 60s and it features nudity. But the book is called And To My Nephew Albert, I Leave the Island What I Won Off Fatty Hagan in a Poker Game. And it's by David Forrest, which was actually a pseudonym for a couple of writers. So this was fun, a really fun comic novel about this young guy who inherits an island from his uncle. The island is in the English Channel, and it's just a rock basically. It has no value, but he goes to it anyway. He meets a girl there who's sunbathing, and fancies her basically, wants to start a relationship with her. And then a Russian boat crashes on the island. The Soviets buy half of the island off him so they can repair their boat, and the Americans then buy the other half of the island off him so they can keep an eye on the Soviets. So kind of just a nice light comic novel with some kind of political overtones. It reminded me a lot of the movie and TV show MASH. It's got that kind of feel to it. So yeah, a fun book. Next then, the final short story collection I read this month, and the newest one. So this one comes out on the 8th of October. So this is Elemental Forces by edited by Mark Morris, with stories by a load of different authors, some really good authors in here. A nice introduction by Mark Morris, and just a really solid collection of modern horror short stories. Real variety here. No real theme to the book other than the fact that all the stories are modern, but I enjoyed it very much indeed. moving on then. 3 more things to go. So I read a graphic novel this month, unexpectedly. So I saw it shared on, I think someone shared it on my Discord, and then Mark Hodder, the author of A Dark and Subtle Light, shared it on Instagram as well. So it's the new graphic novel adaptation of The Road by Cormac McCarthy, which was done by an artist called Manu Larcenet. And it was good. It wasn't perfect. It's definitely not as good as the novel, but it was good. The artwork is great. It really captures some of the emotion of the novel and the bleakness of the novel. So I thought it was a worthwhile endeavour, and I'm glad I read it. But for me, because it's a graphic novel, because you read it very quickly, because there's only 2 characters, so there's very little dialogue, it's really, really quick to read. And that means I think the emotional impact of what is happening in the book doesn't kind of settle on your shoulders in the same way that it does in the novel, which clearly takes a bit longer to read. But still, if you're a fan of the novel, definitely worth a try. If you haven't read the novel, I'd suggest reading the novel first. After that bleakness, I needed something a lot lighter, so I read Agatha Raisin and the Quiche of Death by MC Beaton, which is a kind of cosy mystery. So the first in a long-running series about this woman, Agatha Raisin, who is in her 50s. She's had a successful business. She's decided to retire, and she moves to the Cotswolds, so a kind of rural part of Norfolk in England. And she enters a baking competition, makes a quiche, and the guy who is judging the baking competition dies after eating her quiche. So it's about her investigating what happened. So a fun mystery, some nice comedy in here. Agatha Raisin was not quite what I was expecting as a character. She's a bit more grumpy than I was expecting her to be. She's certainly not the kind of cute little old lady character that the name Agatha Raisin might conjure up. But yeah, a fun read, and I'll definitely be reading more in the series. And then finally, a book that one of my patrons, Dallas, sent me, The Skull Mantra by Elliot Patterson. So this was an interesting and gripping thriller. So published, I think, in the 90s, set in China. So very much focuses on, kind of Chinese society in the 90s, and in particular the treatment by China of Tibetans. So centres on a guy who's a political prisoner who was a detective who gets pulled in to investigate this mysterious body that they found, basically. So the work party that he's part of has discovered this body, and he gets asked to figure out what's going on. So yeah, a gripping thriller, really great sense of place and time. So an enjoyable book, but a book that kind of made you think a little bit as well. So yeah, I had a good time with that one. Okay, confession time. I got to the point of editing this video and realised that I had missed a book. And not only had I missed a book, I'd actually missed my favourite book of the month somehow. So when I film these videos, any books that I read digitally, I just write on Post-its and I put them in amongst the physical books I've got. So I get to them as I go through. And somehow the Post-it for this one obviously got lost. So it's ruined the suspense of the video, because the suspense of these videos is you hear me talk about all of the books, and then at the end I tell you my favourite one, so you can play along and try and guess your favourite one as you go. So this is a bit like a mystery novel where the killer ends up being someone who hasn't been mentioned in the book at all. Anyway, my favourite book of the month was Rest Stop by Nat Cassy. So I will have a full review of that going up in the next couple of days. It comes out on the 8th of October. I really thought this was a great book. So it's an extremely tense and suspenseful novella. It's got some real kind of graphic horror, some really creepy stuff as well. Basically, it's about a guy who's stuck in a gas station restroom, and increasingly weird stuff starts happening to him. I thought it was a fantastic book. It works very well as a suspense novel, but it's also got a bit more. So look out for my full review of it this week, where you'll hear my thoughts about it. But that was definitely my book of the month. Anyway, I will leave it there and say, as always, thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.